Raphael Okafor was 40 years old, a chef who had spent 17 years learning that the most important things in a kitchen were the ones nobody saw. The prep work done before service, the stock that had been going since 4 in the morning, the knife work that happened before a single guest arrived. He drove a 10-year-old Nissan Pathfinder, maroon, with a parking permit for the restaurant district hanging from the mirror. He wore kitchen clogs to work and clean sneakers everywhere else, and had not owned a suit in 6 years because he had not needed one. He kept a small spiral notebook in his apron pocket on service nights and wrote in it between courses, not recipes, but observations, the things he noticed about what was working and what needed to change. His wife Monique filed for divorce in November. In the dissolution proceedings, she told the family court judge, on the record, that Raphael was financially insolvent, that he had no significant assets, that he was effectively broke, and that any support arrangement should reflect the reality of his circumstances. She said it with the flat confidence of someone who believed they were delivering an accurate description. The judge looked at the financial disclosure Raphael's attorney had placed on the bench. The room went quiet. It stayed quiet for a long time. She had no idea what the bank statement said. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen at Masson Okafor smelled like shallots caramelizing and the first stock of the day, which had been going since 5:15 a.m. Raphael was at the prep station by 6. The way he was every morning the restaurant was open, not because anyone required it, but because the morning prep was where the whole service was decided, and he needed to see it himself to know it was right. Raphael Okafor had spent 17 years in professional kitchens, the last 9 as an owner. He had started as a line cook at 23, worked his way through 4 kitchens in 2 cities, earned a reputation as the kind of cook who showed up early and stayed late and had the specific, unfussy competence of someone who understood that technique was not a shortcut to creativity, but its foundation. He had opened his first restaurant at 31. Masson Okafor, 32 seats, New American with West African influence, in a neighborhood in Houston that had not yet become the kind of neighborhood people drove across the city to eat in. Then it had, and Masson had been there first. He drove the maroon Nissan and wore the kitchen clogs and kept the spiral notebook in his apron pocket and was, to anyone who met him outside his professional context, unremarkable in the way that genuinely busy people are unremarkable, focused, unhurried, not performing anything for anyone. He had no social media presence. He had no publicist. He had a website for each of his restaurants that listed hours, menus, and reservation links and nothing else. He had 12 restaurants, not 12 on paper, 12 operating, each with its own identity, its own head chef, its own reservation system. The group was called Okafor Hospitality, incorporated in Delaware, managed through a holding structure that a CFO named Warren Akabe had been building and maintaining for 8 years with the specific, unglamorous precision that good financial architecture required. Masson Okafor was the flagship, the original, the one where Raphael still cooked on Friday and Saturday nights, because the work was why he had done all of it, and he was not going to let the work disappear into the management. Monique had known about the restaurants. She had not known about the holding structure. She had seen 12 restaurants and translated them, in the way people translate things they have not examined closely, into the life they could see: the Nissan, the clogs, the apron pocket notebook, the man who worked every Friday and Saturday night and came home smelling like kitchen smoke. She had decided, sometime in the 3rd year of their marriage, that she had made a smaller choice than she deserved. She had not said this directly. She had communicated it through the accumulation of small disappearances, the evenings that stretched later than they should have, the phone she answered in the other room, the weekend trips with friends she described in decreasing detail. He had noticed. He had filed it away. He had kept working. He would later mark the November morning she served the papers as the last day he spent energy on something that had already decided to leave. The kitchen was quiet in the late morning. Service didn't start until noon. Raphael was at the pass reviewing the lunch mise en place when Monique walked in. She had not been to the restaurant in 4 months. She was dressed as though she had come from somewhere else, or was going somewhere after. The coat was on. The bag was over her shoulder, and she had the specific composure of a woman who had organized herself for a difficult conversation and arrived at the moment with everything in place. He looked up from the mise en place. He set down the inspection spoon. She said she had filed papers that morning. She said she had retained an attorney and she hoped they could handle things like adults. She said she had been unhappy for a long time and that it was better for both of them if they were honest about it. He said, "All right." She said, "I want to be fair, Raphael. I don't want this to be ugly." He said, "Okay." She looked at him. She had expected. He could see more friction than this, more argument, more emotion, the kind of response that would have justified the composure she had brought. The even response unsettled her slightly. She covered it quickly. "I'll be in touch through my attorney," she said. "I'll give you mine," he said. She turned to go. She stopped at the kitchen door. She looked back at him, at the clogs, at the apron, at the inspection spoon he had set on the pass, and something moved across her face that was not quite sympathy. It was the expression of someone looking at a version of a life they had decided was not enough. She left. He noticed she had not asked how the restaurant was doing. He had not, in the last 11 months of the marriage, been able to get her interested in asking. He filed that away. He picked up the inspection spoon. He went back to the mise en place. That evening, before service, he called Warren Akebe. 2 years before the morning she served the papers, Raphael had been reviewing the Q3 financial summary for the group when a line item in the Houston flagship had not matched the mental model he carried of the prior quarter's performance. He had called Warren at 7 in the morning to ask about it. Warren had explained the discrepancy in 4 sentences. Then he had said, "Can I mention something I've been watching?" Raphael had said, "Go ahead." What Warren had been watching was a pattern in the joint personal accounts. Over 16 months, approximately $94,000 had moved out of a joint savings account in irregular amounts, not dramatically, not in a single transfer, but in the kind of slow, consistent reduction that is easy to miss if you are not reviewing the account regularly. Raphael had not been reviewing it regularly. He had been building a 9th and then a 10th and then an 11th restaurant and managing the group's expansion into 2 new cities. "Where did it go?" he said. "A personal account at a different institution," Warren said. "In Monique's name only. The account was opened 22 months ago." Raphael was quiet for a moment. He thought about the coat at the kitchen door. The weekends she didn't explain. The phone in the other room. "Have you verified this?" he said. "I have documentation on every transfer," Warren said. "I've been building the record for 6 months. I didn't want to bring it to you without being thorough." Raphael set the Q3 summary on the desk. He looked at the kitchen through the glass, the morning prep already underway, the first stock going, the day organizing itself the way a good service organized itself, from the ground up, 1 layer at a time. "Give me a week," he said. He spent that week the way he spent a new menu development, not moving fast, but building the full picture before he committed to anything. He talked to Warren 3 more times. He engaged an attorney named Denise Ford, a family law specialist who had been recommended by a colleague in the hospitality industry and who, as Warren had described her, prepared the way a restaurant prepared for a health inspection, thoroughly, in advance, without hoping the inspector didn't look too closely. Denise had reviewed Warren's documentation and asked Raphael one question. "Is there anything in the financial structure of the group that you haven't fully disclosed to your wife?" He had thought about that honestly. Not intentionally concealed, she had never asked about the holding structure, and he had never volunteered a lecture about Delaware incorporation and operating agreements. But not fully disclosed, technically? "No. The structure of the group," he said. "She knows I have 12 restaurants. She doesn't know what they're held under." Denise had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right. We're going to build the full picture together. From the ground up. Every instrument, every account. I want to know everything." He gave her everything. What they built over the following 3 months was the most complete financial portrait Raphael had ever looked at of his own life, not because he had been hiding from it, but because people who spend their lives in the work often don't stop to look at the full shape of what the work has produced. Okafor Hospitality, 12 operating restaurants, annual group revenue of $7 million for the prior fiscal year. Holdings structure with cumulative retained equity of $4 million. The flagship Maison Okafor, real property owned outright, assessed at $1 million. 2 other properties owned in the group. Total asset picture, when fully assembled, $3 million. Raphael had looked at the summary for a long time. He had not thought of himself as someone who had $3 million. He had thought of himself as someone who ran 12 restaurants and needed to make the next one work as well as the last one. Those 2 things were both true. He had simply been looking at the first one and not the second. He set the summary on the desk. He thought about mise en place. The French phrase meant everything in its place. A kitchen that ran correctly had everything it needed within reach before the first ticket came in. The work of preparation was invisible to anyone who hadn't been there for it. The service looked easy because the preparation had been thorough. That was the whole of it. He picked up the summary. He put it in the folder Denise had prepared. He could see the whole shape of it now. He didn't move fast. A sauce that was rushed was a sauce that broke. Denise Ford had been building since the week after the papers were filed. She had requested full financial disclosure from Monique's attorney, standard procedure, and had reviewed the response with the attention of someone looking for the exact place where something broke. The response had been filed in good faith, as far as anyone could tell. It reflected what Monique believed, that Raphael was a working chef with modest assets and a collection of restaurants that were probably leveraged to their eyebrows. Monique's attorney had not done a public records search on Okafor Hospitality's property holdings. He had not pulled the Delaware incorporation documents. He had taken his client's assessment of her husband's finances at face value and filed accordingly. Denise had looked at Raphael when she explained this. She had said, "Her attorney isn't incompetent. He's working from her account. She genuinely doesn't know." Raphael had nodded. He had thought about that for a while. He had not hidden anything from Monique deliberately, but he had also, in 3 years of marriage, never sat down with her and walked through the business structure the way he walked through a new menu, ingredient by ingredient, layer by layer, until she could taste what it was. He had assumed she knew, because it was his life and he knew. That assumption had been wrong. He was not going to compound it by treating her attorney's mistake as an opportunity. He was going to let the financial disclosure do what financial disclosure was supposed to do: tell the truth. Denise had prepared the financial disclosure document over 6 weeks. Warren had sourced every instrument, every restaurant's operating statement, every property record, every account. The complete Okafor hospitality picture, assembled with the precision that Warren brought to everything he touched. The night before the hearing, Raphael sat at the kitchen counter of the apartment he'd taken after the separation, spiral notebook open, and wrote 3 things. Don't speak first. Let the document speak. Leave when it's finished. He looked at it for a moment. Then he closed the notebook and went to sleep. Monique's attorney called Denise that evening with a settlement proposal. He was confident his client had assessed the situation and believed she understood the range of what was available. He had proposed figures that were well within what a working chef with 12 moderately successful restaurants might reasonably have to offer. Denise thanked him for the call. She said they would see him in the morning. She texted Raphael afterward. She still thinks she knows the number. He replied, I know. She replied, get some sleep. He did. Raphael arrived at the Harris County Family Court on Bagby Street 31 minutes early. He liked it that way. The courtroom had the particular quality of official spaces: wood paneling, fluorescent light, the smell of recycled air and paper. The gallery was mostly empty at this hour. The clerks were setting up. Denise was at the plaintiff's table, her brief already organized, her reading glasses on. She did not look up when Raphael sat down. She was reading. He sat. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at the bench. Monique arrived with her attorney, a man named Sterling Cross, at 7 minutes past 9. She came in composed, dressed carefully, carrying a folder, moving with the posture of someone who had prepared for a proceeding she believed she understood. She sat without looking at Raphael. Sterling Cross arranged his documents with the methodical efficiency of a man who had done this many times and expected to do it a few more times today before noon. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Osai, came in at 9:15. Sterling Cross opened with Monique's position. He outlined the marital estate as his client had described it, the shared living expenses, the joint accounts, the restaurants as an ongoing but modestly profitable enterprise. He submitted Monique's financial declaration. He argued for a support arrangement that reflected the documented income picture. Then, he said it. He said that the plaintiff's financial circumstances were consistent with those of a working restaurateur, with reinvested profits and limited liquid assets. He said that the plaintiff had, to his client's knowledge, no significant savings or investment holdings beyond the operating businesses. He said, with the flat professional confidence of a man delivering a position he had no reason to doubt, Your Honor, to be direct, the plaintiff's financial position is essentially insolvent outside of the restaurant operations themselves. The judge looked at him. She looked at Denise. Denise stood. She placed the Okafor Hospitality Financial Disclosure on the clerk's table. She placed a copy on Sterling Cross's table. She handed one to the judge's clerk. She said, Your Honor, I'd like to enter the plaintiff's complete financial disclosure into the record. The document covers all assets held under Okafor Hospitality LLC, its subsidiaries, and associated personal holdings. I believe it addresses counsel's characterization directly. The judge opened the disclosure. The room was quiet. It stayed quiet. The judge read the first page. She turned to the second. She looked at the revenue figure for the group. She looked at the asset summary at the bottom of page 3. She looked at the property records. She set the document on the bench and looked at Sterling Cross over her reading glasses. Sterling Cross had picked up his copy. He was reading it. His expression had not changed, but the quality of his stillness had. It was the stillness of a man performing a rapid recalculation of every position he had just stated in open court. He put the document down. He picked it up again. $11.3 million in total assets. Annual group revenue of $7 million. $6.4 million in retained equity. Monique was reading over Sterling's shoulder. Something moved across her face. The specific, sequential movement of a person watching a structure they had built collapse at the load-bearing point. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just the face of someone whose confidence in what they knew had just been precisely and permanently corrected. The judge said, "Mr. Cross, would you like a recess to review the disclosure with your client?" Sterling Cross said, "Yes, Your Honor, we would." The judge said 15 minutes. Raphael stood. He walked to the gallery and sat in the back row with his notebook. He opened it. He added a fourth line below the 3 from the night before, mise en place. He closed it. Denise came back to sit beside him during the recess. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, quietly, "How are you?" "Fine," he said. "The number landed correctly," she said. "I know." She looked at him. "You're not going to say anything to her?" It was not a question. "No," he said. Denise nodded once. She went back to the table. When the proceedings resumed, Sterling Cross had revised his client's position. The new settlement framework was materially different from the one he had opened with. It was, in Denise's assessment, communicated to Raphael in a text during the second recess, a number she can live with that reflects what is actually real. Raphael had authorized Denise to negotiate from the correct position, not generously, not punitively, but correctly, fair to both parties. Accurate, documented, he stood at the end of the proceedings. He buttoned the jacket he had bought the week before. Because Denise had told him it mattered what he wore to court, and he had believed her. He shook Denise's hand. He nodded to the court clerk, who had looked at him once during the bank statement silence with the expression of someone performing determined neutrality. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He did not turn to Monique. He did not have a sentence for her. The document had said what needed to be said. He walked out into the November morning. It did not happen all at once. The settlement took 3 months to finalize. The $94,000 in drawn-down joint savings was addressed in the property division, characterized accurately, recovered in part. The final settlement reflected the real numbers, properly calculated. Monique received what she was entitled to from a marriage with a man who had $3 million in assets and had never told her. It was not nothing. It was less than she had expected to negotiate toward, and more than she had thought she was entitled to negotiate for, which was its own kind of correction. Sterling Cross had sent Denise a professional note afterward. It had said, "Well prepared. Remind me not to make assumptions again about restaurant owners." Denise had shown it to Raphael. He had read it and handed it back without comment. By the following spring, Raphael had opened a 13th restaurant, a small West African tasting menu in a renovated space in Houston's 3rd Ward that he had been thinking about for 2 years and had not started because there had always been something more pressing. He started it 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized, because the timing was finally right, and because he had learned in 17 years of cooking that the right dish waited for the right moment and not a minute longer. The 13th restaurant was called Estuary. It had 22 seats. It had no sign on the exterior except the address number. It was fully reserved for the next 4 months. Warren Ikebe had been at the soft opening. He had eaten at the chef's counter and had, when Raphael came out after service to sit for a moment, looked at him and said, You should have opened this one first. Raphael said, I wasn't ready. Warren looked at him. Are you now? Raphael thought about the stock that had been going since 5:15. The mise en place done before the first guest arrived. The 17 years of prep work that nobody saw. Yeah, he said. I think I am. On a Saturday evening in February, Raphael was at the pass at Maison Okafor. Service in full swing. The dining room at capacity. The kitchen running with the specific organized velocity that a good kitchen achieved when every element was in its correct place and everyone in the room knew their job. He called a ticket. He tasted the sauce on the third course. He adjusted the seasoning by the amount that no one but him would have caught, but that he could not leave uncorrected. He called the table. He went back to the next ticket. The spiral notebook was in his apron pocket. He had not written in it yet tonight. Service like this, clean, fast, everything in sequence, didn't require notes. It was the service that reminded him why he had done all of it. The 12 restaurants and the 13th and the holding structure and the Delaware Incorporation and all of the invisible architecture that had made the room go quiet. All of it so that he could stand at this pass, in this kitchen, doing this work correctly. He called another ticket. He kept going. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.